Welcome to Living Outside the Matrix, this show where we examine important issues either ignored or misrepresented in the mainstream. Hi there, I'm your host, Nigel Howitt, and on the show today we're going to be looking at a very important issue and a topical issue, that of schooling and leading into home education, the problems with school and the potential solutions that we might find outside of school. And with me to discuss this topic is David Adelman from Manchester. David, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and a warm welcome to the show.
Pleasure, Nigel, and it's great to be here, especially since you've just told me what your remit is, and it's exactly the same as mine.
Well, David, maybe you can kick us off by introducing yourself to anyone out there who hasn't heard of you and hasn't heard of your book, which we'll be discussing today. Just to give a bit of a short intro into your background and how you came to be interested in the problems of modern schooling.
Well, I was originally trained a long time ago as a lawyer, but I left that profession because I found it too claustrophobic, and I'm not temperamentally suited to office work. I then went off to Spain, where I taught English as a foreign language. There's not much else you can do there, even when your Spanish is quite good, because the market doesn't allow for much more. So I noticed that the Spanish students would boast how good their English was, and yet I didn't hear them. I couldn't make head or tail of when they were talking to me. I didn't understand them, and they didn't seem to understand me. And yet, so I asked them, "Who's taught you English?" And they said, "Well, we've got really good, well-qualified teachers." I said, "Yes, but who? Are they English or Americans or are they Spanish?" And invariably they would say they were local natives, in other words, Spanish speakers. So I made a note to self that whoever's teaching languages around the world, it's not happening. It's not working, because they tend to be locals who have a paper qualification and minimal interest, minimal connection to the actual culture that they're allegedly or supposed to be teaching. So when I came back from Spain, I have a lifelong passion, which is the card game bridge. And to cut a very long story short, I found myself funded to go to schools to teach a simplified version of bridge called mini bridge. And I went to dozens and dozens and dozens, well, probably three figures, over 100 schools over a period of 10, 12 years. And there I found that the schooling culture was not conducive to children's happiness or well-being. So, for example, I would go in, as being a card game, the children would love it, but teachers, the first class I ever went to, the teacher turned her back on me and just let me get on with it. So I thought, this doesn't seem right. The children are clearly enjoying what they're doing, and the teacher doesn't want any part of it. So it just led me to feel that there was, again, something not quite right. And pieces of the jigsaw started to fit together. I'd have children come to me and say, "I only come into school because I know you're going to be here." This was regular lunchtime clubs, by the way, rather. So it's a whole mixture of processes. But the long and the short of it is that it made me realize, my experience in schools made me realize that schooling is not child-centered. It's not really for the benefit of children. There is another agenda. And I wrote a report to my funders to say that what we're doing is not particularly welcome in schools, and they ignored it. And the resentment of being ignored led me to write an ebook. And then, long story short, again, the ebook became a paperback book. Yeah. And I asked for contributions because the original manuscript was basically about my experiences. Then when I asked for contributions from parents and teachers, it was obvious that the problem was way, way bigger than even I had realized. And I just did a lot more research, and that ended up being the full-on version of the book.
The whole issue of schooling and in the current context of the alleged pandemic, I think is being brought even more to parents' attention. I know a lot of parents who, having had their children at home for quite a long period this year, have been almost reluctant to send them back. They've sort of entered a new world, if you like, and realised that maybe it's more conducive to what they were doing. And when you combine that with this, insane social distancing at schools, with children sitting behind perspex screens, the psychological damage to children just seems, catastrophic to me and to many others. But maybe that's another issue. But perhaps you can start us off, David, with some sort of summary. Your book's is packed with loads of examples of this, but some kind of summary as to of the worst aspects of school. That there are obviously quite a few harmful things going on in school, which maybe many parents are unaware of. Where do we start to unpick that? Could you lead us in on that one?
To answer that question, let me refer you to a NASA, and I think it is mentioned in the book, a NASA study, a longitudinal study of about 1,500 children based on creative genius. So they took 5-year-olds and monitored them for 10 years. So it was between the age of 5 and 15, 1,500 of them. At the age of 5, they used an evaluation to calculate that 99% of them classified as geniuses, creative geniuses. 5 years later, at the age of 10, it was down to about 50%. And by the end of their schooling, at the age of about 15, barely 1% passed the test of genius. So the first answer to your question is that the imagination and creativity and individual spark of young infants, 10 years of schooling, destroys that in virtually all cases.
Yeah.
And they just become compliant, unimaginative drones who are more focused on peer group approval and looking good, sounding good, and dressing right, I suppose, technically, rather than any kind of individual expression of who they really are. So that's the first thing. And then the other major blight that affects schooling is PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. It's complex in the sense that nobody knows that they've got it. It's not like, many phrases have been hijacked and captured by the mainstream. And one of them is PTSD, and everyone associates that with war veterans or people who've had serious car accidents, but really, PTSD is one of the most common issues for any children who are now adults who basically had their individuality, not just their creativity, but their individuality and their sovereignty and their integrity and sense of self quashed by years of having to obey instructions without question, sit in the same seat, never allowed to ask questions, sometimes even not allowed to go to the toilet, ridiculed, belittled, and filled with utter nonsense, which is the mainstream curriculum fodder. And as a result of that, they become not just less creative, but less of a boy or girl. It happened to me. When I was 5 or 6, I was basically quite amazing. I was talented, gifted, confident. I could do anything. 10 years later, by the time I was 15, all I could do was what the school had trained me to do, which was a few A levels and a few O levels. And all that confidence had drained out of me, all that ability to imagine, ability to create. I remember at school I was asked to draw, to do some drawing, and all I could draw was a television.
It's quite telling, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. So we're talking about loss of creativity, loss of individuality, and loss of self-worth. And really, in extreme cases, we're talking about loss of life because children are now committing suicide.
Yeah.
And even the ones that don't actually commit suicide have got suicidal ideation. And this is nothing new. This is going back even before this current nonsense hit the fan. So suicidal ideation, or even if it's not suicidal ideation, it's the loss of life joy, the joie de vivre, as the French say, which means that they now become addicted to substances and things that will see them through or rectify this loss of life enjoyment and that feeling in the morning that you're so excited you can't wait to live the day. And many children and young people have lost that. And we know what happens later in life. They become alcohol dependent, sex, drugs, rock and roll dependent. And they really are lost to the world, lost to themselves and lost to the world. Now, I'm not putting all that at the feet of head teachers, teachers and the schooling system, but I am putting quite a substantial amount down to the schooling system. Obviously, you can have dysfunctional parenting, you could get into the wrong peer group, or you could have a personality disorder that maybe transcends all of those things. But the schooling system is certainly a massive piece of that jigsaw.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you mentioned genius and so forth, and there's an interesting comment by Ayn Rand in a letter that she wrote. I think it was the Comprachicos, the title of her essay, where she mentions that children, the amazing potential that children are born with. If any man or woman could learn as much in 2 years as a young infant does in the first 2 years of its life, they would rapidly acquire the status of genius in the learn to control bladder and so forth and basic sort of motoring around, the use of their body, their limbs, learning to walk, learning to conceptualize, learning to talk. The rate of learning and the natural curiosity of children is phenomenal in their early years, and as you say, we see that sort of we see it. However, it's managed. It's crushed out of them, and most children leave school with a sense of relief, rather than having their desire and ability to learn. And learning should be an eternal, lifelong process, rather than having that stimulated and I'm out here. What else can I discover? It's a relief. Oh, it's over. So yes, there are definitely systemic problems in schooling, aren't there? And one of them that you alluded to in your book, that maybe we can expand a bit more on, is the idea of everything being sort of taught in isolated compartments with nothing interconnected, with no context, with no observation of principles, with no connection to the real world. Things are sort of arbitrary, they're isolated. Obviously, the whole concept of teaching isolated subjects is a kickstarter to that process. But even the study of different ideas within, say, geography or in history or something, are not integrated into a greater context, which is the reality from which those subjects and events and examples have been plucked. And this, I think, has a huge impact on young people's lack of ability to think and join dots and see a bigger picture, therefore understand the world they live in, and therefore have any hope of living a successful life. Could you expand on that idea in the way that you do in your book?
Well, the hunger for learning, imagine you're feeding a child and you don't wait until the child has actually finished their meal to give them more food. This is what's going on in schools. They're suffering indigestion, and if you force feed a child information, we're not even sure that the information is correct. Most information peddled at schools now, and it's getting less and less. It's getting more and more suspect, I should say, every day. Yeah. There are agendas across the board feeding children all kinds of politically correct and strange information, but that's another issue. So you can give children indigestion, and when children have indigestion, they don't want to feed, they don't want to eat anymore, which means, translate that to the schooling system, they don't want to learn anymore. Yeah. I left school with an abhorrence and aversion to learning. And I was a successful student. I went to a good school and I did well. But I'd been force-fed so much nonsense that for many, many years, decades, I really did not want to learn very much at all. I just went minimal. So, yes, the idea is that schooling is essentially academic. It used to be less so, but it's become more and more, and it's just paperwork. And if you look at in the Oxford English Dictionary for a definition of academic, it translates as, or it's defined as, of no practical value. So schooling, therefore, by definition, is of no practical value. Paperwork, academia. That's so. If your objective is to create learning hungry, creative, adaptable, resilient, excited young adults ready for life, it won't happen at school.
No.
You learn, and also the learning process from the age of 0 to 7, we learn by osmosis. That's why we literally breathe in our mother tongue, and we breathe in all kinds of skills and talents from those around us. From the age of 7, the learning process changes to a process of learning by repetition. So at school, the things that you tend to repeat are the mechanical things like answering to your name in registration. So you there learn that your name is your surname and not your first name, and that has massive legal implications, which goes beyond our remit today. You learn to sit still. You learn to do as you're told. So you're learning nothing creative and dynamic. You're learning to be less and less and less, and to fit in to a model that helps the teacher pay their mortgage and helps the school get funding, but ultimately does very little for you as someone who ideally would go on to be an amazing individual and make an amazing contribution.
Yeah. There are definitely a number of problems, aren't there, with modern schooling, and it always struck me. I mean, I hasten to add here that I'm a home educator. I don't call it homeschool, but I have 3 young children that have never been to school, and it always struck me as being an impossibility to learn how to really function for a life on Earth, learn how to gain the practical skills of all the things that we adults take for granted, all the interactions, all the things that we in a contrived and artificial environment of a school, in this arbitrary situation where you're all in desks, as you say, you're sat still, you can't speak unless you're spoken to, all of this sort of stuff. You're not doing all of those things that you naturally do when you're out and about in the real world. You're interacting, you're talking to people, you're trying to gain skills and efficacious abilities in all sorts of areas. And at school, you're isolated. You're not doing any of that, are you? But it seems that these days that you also have the extra sort of scariness of high fence wires and security systems in schools, security cameras. There's nowhere to hide. There's no privacy. Not least the Wi-Fi and the Bluetooth and all the electromagnetic bombardment of young children's bodies in the school environment. So maybe you can share with us your insights on some of these other aspects, of the negative side of school.
Well, I do a talk about my book and about the issues raised in the book, and there's a slide that shows a school with 7 feet of fencing and cameras, and I just say to the audience, "What does this look like?" And they all go, "Well, it looks like a prison." And I said, "Well, it doesn't just look like a prison, ladies and gentlemen. It is a prison." So a Canadian father, going back about 10 years. Made a discovery that schools are built by the same companies that build prisons using the same materials. And when he found that out, a penny dropped, the light bulb went on, and he pulled his son out of school, and he went off to, I think it was Thailand. I'm not sure about that, but some exotic Eastern country, and founded Bali. That's right, Bali. Founded his own school. In the jungle or in the forests of Bali. Yes, it's conditioning. It's all about conditioning. It's all about making children adapt to what will be 10 or 15 years later an environment in which they will be imprisoned in the workplace, forced to sit down, do as they're told, answer to a manager. So all the elements that are put in place in school are translated, are transferable and transferred to the work environment. So you've got basically an industrial model, a post-industrial model, and it's now a technological model in which young people now going into the world of work are happy to sit with their back to each other, talking into, well, let's say there's an example of a call center. There's another slide that I show of two young people sat with their back to each other. And they'll do that because at school, they learn to separate. So the divide and conquer principle, where when I was at school, if I was in 4T, which was the fourth year with the T designation, so that was German and French or whatever, there was another class that was 4S, and we didn't speak to 4S. So not only did you not speak to children of another year group, so of a year above you, a year below you, even within the same year group, you would tend to stick only to your class. So that would translate into the work environment. You'll only talk to the closest person to you and to no one else. So, and even in staff rooms across the country, staff lunch breaks are being shortened, so even the staff can't socialize. The workload is being increased. It's just one big anti-human exercise. And where this all comes from, let me just briefly go into that. The British model was based on the Prussian model. The Prussian model was a military model of schooling. And when the British invented sort of the more modern version in the early part of the 20th century, there was no profession of teacher. The teaching profession didn't exist. So they just recruited from the army to teach basically the army's own children so they could go abroad into the empire and train people to learn English and obey English rules so that they could manage the Raj. And that military model persists today. And you can just tell the way teachers, I think there's a phrase in the book called the bellowing teacher, the way teachers the slightest provocation go from being what you could call everyday people to being military sort of sergeants, boot camp operators, bellowing out instructions, frightening the living daylights out of certain children, especially younger ones and introverts and sensitives. And it produces an atmosphere of fear and coercion, which, like I said before, is not how we should bring young people into the world. It's not. It has an unhappy ending.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, coercion, I think, is a really key fundamental here in the concept of school, because I wouldn't advocate against the idea of classes or courses or any kind of formal instruction necessarily. I'm definitely not of that opinion. But I think when something is compulsory, when there is no choice, and when everything about the modern schooling structure, we're talking general government schools, Montessori and Rudolf Steiner and other alternatives aside for a moment, that the mainstream schooling model it's not about any choice at all, isn't it? It's all about compliance. And I think there's a quote in your book, government, from Tony Benn: government don't want a healthy, intelligent population. They're difficult to control. And it is largely about control, isn't it? It's largely about teaching compliance, teaching your place, not causing a problem, not asking too many questions. But what I find is one of the most insidious things about it is that it really doesn't teach anybody to think. And I mean, thinking, I think, is the greatest life skill that you possibly have. It's been said by Ayn Rand to be our basic survival skill. And the schooling process seems to be the antithesis of any kind of encouragement to think, doesn't it? I mean, there are a couple of great examples in your book, and also not only of thinking being crushed, but also dreams and aspirations being crushed. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the examples was a young child who was asked what he wanted to be when he was older, and he dreamt of running a horse equestrian or sort of horse training centre, and he was reprimanded and got an F on his assignment. And fortunately, he had a thinking father who obviously had a chat with him, and he came back to the teacher and said, "You can keep your F, and I'll keep my dreams," which I thought was rather wonderful. But yeah, maybe you can speak into that. Not only the sort of the ability, the fact that children aren't taught to think at all. In your book, you go into the trivium and the quadrivium as maybe more ancient methods that were structured to actually encourage some kind of mental process, some kind of ability to process information and facts and evidence from the world around us into knowledge. And again, this is completely absent in schools, isn't it?
Well, children are actually meant to be our teachers. They're the ones that come through with fresh ideas, with ways of being and doing. For example, when I'm near children, if I'm in a park surrounded by children, it already uplifts my energy because they're skipping, hopping, jumping, singing, shouting, playing. And if adults were more like children, the world would be a much better place within days. So yes, it's about controlling children. It's about trying to make children into adults, but adults are nothing to write home about. When I look around at my audiences, whether it's education or law, because that's the other hat that I wear, the amount of embarrassment, guilt, and shame that I see when people think that they have a question to ask, but they don't ask it because they weren't allowed to at school. And it's all about allowing, just allowing children to be. And I mean, I was giving a session of mini bridge after school in a very nice little primary school in a very nice part of Manchester, and the children, the volume levels just went up and up and up. And most of the children were just screaming. And I looked around and I thought, this actually is not a problem because nobody's angry. No one's screaming at anyone. They're just screaming, they're shouting. And I thought, well, they must be excited. So I did nothing. And then within minutes, a teacher who was doing some after school bookmarking or whatever came and poked her head around and she said, "You need to learn to control your children."
That says it in a nutshell, doesn't it?
Yeah. And then reflecting back in the retroscopometer, whatever they call it, I was thinking, well, or I can now see that what was happening is that the children had been in her class all day and been repressed. They came to my session of a card game and they just cut loose. Yeah. And it wasn't a problem for me because I looked closely. Obviously, if I'd have looked and seen somebody bullying someone or picking on someone, I would have drawn their attention to it, done something about it. I couldn't see that. I just thought, this is natural exuberance coming out. And I thought, this is wonderful. Well, it's wonderful in one respect, but it's sad in another respect because they clearly need to do this to release all the pent-up frustration of having been in class for 6 or 7 hours and not able to do this. Yeah. Now, I know your original question was about the ability to think, and I'll address that in a minute. But one of my even stronger than this, the inability to think, or even more relevant, is the inability to feel. We're not allowed to feel, and so these children were not given their feelings were not given full rein. They're not allowed to express themselves. And yes, obviously, in amongst that is the ability to think for yourself and make suggestions, take the day in a direction that suits you, question the narrative. It's not something that's encouraged. It's regarded as dangerous. And now, if you come into the COVID arena, if you show any signs of questioning the COVID narrative, you are categorized as dangerous conspiracy theorist. Go back into the classroom, and that is what the child would have been back in the day: dangerous individual free thinker. Obviously not conspiracy theorist. Children don't tend to be labeled that. But now there's a situation bringing the two worlds together where children are now reporting to teachers about their own parents' free thinking. So this is a strange mishmash of situations here. And the teachers are now reporting to social services and the police that this child has got free thinking parents, and the child is then kidnapped, taken to a safe place. And this is I know I'm going slightly off topic.
Yeah, no. I mean, please feel free to meander around the topics, because it's a very, very valid point.
Yeah, so we've got an overlapping of all these controlling situations where teacher, who's the agent of control on behalf of the estate, child is now buying into that. So we have a collaborative child, which is tragic in itself, now reporting their own free thinking parents to the system.
Yeah.
So it's getting, well, it always was sad, but now and traumatic, but now it's really dangerous. Yeah. Really, really dangerous.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Obviously, in terms of a vibrant and exuberant bunch of children in a classroom, typically people are sort of, even most adults are continuously, oh yes, that's terrible. But I come back to the point I suggested earlier, in that I think classes, courses, and formal instruction in a quiet, ordered environment, dare I say it, are I'm not against that. I think that has its place. But again, we're talking about school as this sort of, 5 days a week, all day, sitting still, false sort of environment that's coercive, that is the problem. And I think when children are, or when people, to generalize it more, because us adults can all relate to this, if you choose a course, if you think, do you know what, I want to learn about, whatever it is, and you go and attend that course, you're choosing to be there. Your whole approach is so different than if it was like, right, now you must do that course. People are just disengaged. They don't want to be there. They're looking out the window. So I think a key component again is whether or not attendance is compulsory, which feeds into that. And as you mentioned, the children were extra exuberant because they'd just sort of come out of a very closeted, controlled environment, and they were sort of breaking loose a bit, and you were sort of letting them sort of flap their wings around a little bit. But so I think there's a distinction there to be made, isn't there? Because I'm sure you wouldn't advocate a sort of everyone shouting at each other in a sort of an educational environment. It can work in some cases, but obviously in others there are times for quietness too. But it's interesting also, that you raised the point about feelings, not allowed to feel. I mean, it runs deep there. I mean, personally, I think that thinking is more important than feeling, because our thinking we arrive at our values through our thinking primarily, and then our feelings and emotions are a response to our values. So there is a sort of a horse and cart thing, but none of that is taught in the mainstream. There's all sorts of not only lacking things in the mainstream school model, but also, as you've already alluded to, many problems, many negative things that children are being subjected to. I mean, unless there are any other negative issues, shall we steer the conversation round to more, how we could change things to the better, or are there more examples of the problems we need to avoid that you want to address first, David?
No, we can start to steer it round, and we can do that by there is and you've hinted at what the remedy is. It's an incredibly simple remedy for all of this, and it cuts across the board. Beyond education into marriage, into work, into life itself. Remove the coercion, remove the compulsion, and introduce voluntary choice, free will choice. We are living allegedly on a free will planet, but most of the institutions that we know, whether it's schooling, marriage, work, or whatever, are not free will choice institutions. How many people around the world are stuck in a marriage where they feel as though they've lost all their free will choice? How many people around the world are stuck in a job in which they feel obliged to continue to do without the option of a healthy, viable alternative? And similarly, if you tell children, right, you've reached the age of 4 or 5, off you go to school, then don't be surprised if all hell breaks loose later on in life. And it's the same across the board. So if we do what Finland does and allow children to start school later, or even go even further, allow children to start school when they feel they are ready for that experience that you just enunciated, which is the experience of quiet, reflective study. I don't personally believe that many children are ready for quiet, reflective study until the age of maybe 10, 12, or even 14.
I would totally agree with that, yeah.
Yeah, I think if we say that children below a certain age need to be just children and free roam free, think free, feel free, act free,
yeah,
then, okay, you will have the odd rogue that takes advantage. But like the judge said once upon a time, better to allow 10 guilty men to go free than to convict and imprison one innocent man, if you see what I mean. We must never throw the baby out with the bathwater. We must basically allow everyone their freedom. If 1 or 2 individuals take advantage, well, we can deal with that.
Sure. I'm not even sure. I'm not sure I know what you mean by going rogue a young child. I think if young children are not coerced, if they're not imprisoned in this institution where they have no choice, they're expected to be able to learn how to make choices to conduct themselves in life. We expect children to know what to do and to take responsibility for themselves when they come out of school, and yet they have 12 years of being told what to do. It's very, very back to front. But if you remove the child from this coercive environment and let them sort of flap around and go crazy for a bit, metaphorically speaking, like when you sort of just first get out into the playground, you might run around and scream and shout. You just need to let some energy out. When that sort of metaphorically has passed, I'm not sure that any child would go rogue, would in any way become a bad version of themselves as a result of being non-coerced into an institution. I think only good could come from that. And as you say, that the place for formal education, and I believe there really is a place for it, should be voluntary, and it should come much later. It should come when any child or when any young human being decides, well, now I'd like to learn about this or that. Let's go and find out. And when they approach a subject rather than having it, enforced on them, everything's different. And then, of course, quiet time. You sit and you're going to attentively listen to someone, for goodness sake. If somebody's telling me, a course, if I'm doing a course on how to be healthy or knowing the law, one of your other your course that you offer, I'm going to go there and I'm going to be quiet and I'm going to listen and I'm going to take notes because I want to know. And this is a really big, crucial distinction, isn't it?
Well, in the book, I call the greatest social evil coercion. Coercion is the root of all social evil, in my opinion. Yeah. And if you remove that and replace it with, the idea of a child going rogue, I was just addressing a hypothetical position. If somebody's watching this, because I've had a lot of people over the years say, well, it's all very well to give children their freedom, but, and they go, it's the but people, the people that have always got reservations. So I wanted to meet them halfway and say, it's not you'll always have one child that has issues with freedom. But like you say, that it's not going to be a major problem. It will, if there is a problem, it will be transitory. Some people have to get used to freedom. It's not something that they're used to. It's not something that everybody naturally enjoys because it comes with responsibility.
Absolutely. I mean, if I can just interject there, I mean, I define freedom as the ability to act on one's own judgment. So naturally that implies the ability to make a judgment. So acting appropriately when you're uncoerced rests on your ability to evaluate, think, and determine an appropriate course of action. In other words, to take effective responsibility for yourself and act appropriately. So that needs to come first, and it can't, because it's not allowed to, or the child is not able to develop these skills of deciding what to do. What shall I do here? What shall I do here? Because everything's prescribed for them in school. Everything from 9 until 3:30 or whenever it is they come off is prescribed activities. Go here, ding ling ling, stop that. Go here, ding ling ling, stop that. Go here. There's no environment in which I think a young person can develop the ability to hone their own judgment and therefore know how to choose appropriate behaviour. And as you say, cope with freedom. So it effectively makes freedom a sort of an alien concept to our young people, doesn't it? Which is a complete disaster for society.
Well, okay, 3 points, if I can remember them all. Yes, we have a Pavlov's dog situation going on here, in which children become conditioned beings and conditioned adults. I mean, I haven't taught bridge to adults for some time now. I've moved on to different things, but when I taught bridge to adults, I would have adults sticking up their hand, saying, "What do I do now, David?" And I would say, "Why are you asking me?" And they would look very bemused. And they would say, "Because you're the teacher." And I would say, "Yes, but you're the learner. If I tell you what to do, you won't have learned anything. You have to do it. If it's right, congratulate yourself. If it's wrong, congratulate yourself, because you've now learned something."
Yeah, even if it's what not to do. Yeah.
Correct. If I tell you, that's just dogma, and you won't have learned a single thing. And I really struggled to get that message across. And that it was one of those feelings that inspired me to write the book. Thinking we have entire generations of learning disabled men and women.
Yeah.
And we have a so-called democracy, which cannot possibly be a democracy because there are no democratic schools. How can you build a society of grown-ups who are meant to belong to a democratic society when they haven't experienced democracy at school? So not only were they not encouraged to think for themselves, they were not given a say. Now, I know that there are some school parliaments where children are elected onto a parliament and given a say. So this is not a total generalization, but in the main, children's say is just as their thoughts is not encouraged. And if you look for democratic schools along the Sudbury model, the Summerhill School is one of the few that I know. There's literally 3 or 4 democratic schools in this country, and probably only about 50 in America. So the linchpin of democracy, America and the UK, has virtually no democratic schooling. So we need to rethink everything completely. Yeah. We need to give children a say, or at least allow them to play and roam free while they're developing the cognitive skills to have that say. And in the meantime, when they come into the environment in which we can input things for them, they will have already made their own ideas, and they've got their bank of questions ready to shoot, ready to fire at us. And that would make teaching, I don't even like the word teaching, actually, educating. Yeah. That will make educating a joyful process for the grown-ups.
Yep.
Because it removes coercion, it removes dogma, it retains the hunger for learning, it retains enthusiasm, it retains creativity and imagination, and we can then hook into the energy of the child, and so you won't have teachers, educators. I'll call them teachers because that's what they call themselves.
Yeah.
Who at the age of 45, 50, 55 are burnt out because they haven't tapped into the energy of children. They've denied it from themselves. And then they wonder why they get burnout, because children are infinitely more energetic than grown-ups. And all we need to do is tap into their energy, and then life becomes effortless both for the child and for the grown-up.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if I can dive in there, the idea of sort of fending off awkward questions from children and tied in with the concept of the right answer, because a key feature of modern schooling is the right answer, isn't it? The whole concept of testing and so forth depends on the right answer. And I think this ties in with what you're saying, your bridge students, the adult students, having a problem with the learning technique and finding their own way, and sort of like learning to walk. You learn to walk by taking steps and falling over, not by asking somebody to tell you how to do it. And I think this concept of the right answer, which is pervasive in modern schooling, is really unhelpful, should we say, because it tends to fend off any further inquiry, because there's one answer, the right answer, the teacher's got it, and there's no point in looking anywhere else, sort of thing. I mean, it's an absolute disaster for shutting off inquiring, thinking minds. There are so many alternative ways of educating where you could just encourage endless questioning. One of the things that I do with my children, if we're learning something about, I don't know, any subject, maybe steel manufacture or something, something like where does steel come from, and we just sort of brainstorm loads of questions. What do they do that? Why do they smelt it? What's it mixed with? How's it transported? How much does it cost? And you get all of these different angles invited by all the different questions to uncover different aspects of the subject, and in my view, this is a way of encouraging more of a thinking and inquiring process that is very, very different from this idea of the one answer, which you memorize, hopefully, along with hundreds of other boring, correct answers for your test on Monday morning. And it just stifles that learning process.
An example from everyday life of educational fascism and the spillover into adult life is the idea that people convey in the phrase, "you're wrong."
Yeah.
If you break down the phrase "you're wrong," and I'm pointing my finger because that's metaphorically what people are doing. They're translating, or they're trying to remove all the guilt and shame that they've been inculcated with from their schooling, and they're trying to actually transfer it out of their system onto someone else. If you break it down, "you're wrong." Okay, you are wrong. So R is the idea of using the verb to be is a permanent descriptor. So you're actually telling someone way beyond disagreement that you disagree with them. You're saying that somehow you're wrong. It's like you're defective.
Yeah, you're metaphysically wrong.
yeah. God was wrong when He built you. Yeah. So it's an character and personality and spiritual annihilator. You are wrong, and it only works in English. I think German has the same phrase, but in most other languages, they say something like, "you have reason," or "you have." So they use the verb to have.
Yeah.
French, "tu as raison." Yeah. And you're Spanish, right. Tienes razón. Yeah. Or the opposite would be the same. So that they're not actually annihilating anyone. Yeah. They actually are expressing rational disagreement.
Indeed, you either have reason or you don't have reason. That's really, really important, isn't it? Because it's not about being wrong. It's about, or it should be about, examining the facts. So any process of education, if we were to educate ourselves on the climate issue or the COVID-19 issue, it should rightly be a process of, well, what are the facts? Let's examine the facts and draw conclusions. And a lot of the time in the mainstream media, of course, we hear conclusions, alleged conclusions, just asserted. So things are just asserted, they're stated, they're repeated. And really a better response to that would be, well, let's check that conclusion. I don't think that conclusion's correct. And it sort of depersonalizes it slightly, wouldn't it? Because it should be about examination of facts and evidence, and indeed reasoned argument, to arrive at a conclusion that's backed up by the facts of reality, rather than here's the right answer, learn it, because that's a dead end street.
There is taking your theme about steering the conversation towards remedy and positive future and positive solution. There is a generation of children being born now in increasingly greater number who cannot be schooled. They certainly cannot be schooled along mainstream lines. It would kill them. It would kill them morally, and it might even kill them physically, certainly emotionally. And the reason is that they are ready to know much more than they will receive at school. They know it already. They're born knowing. And this is a generation, I mean, they were indigos and rainbows and crystals, and there's probably new phrases now, but they have expanded consciousness. I can give a concrete example. I know a boy who is now his own mother's teacher. Her consciousness is expanded compared to the average, but he's now, I think, 7. And he, at the age of 3, he was saying things like, "Mummy, I think you need to put your seatbelt on." That's at the age of 3 or 4. And at the age of 7, he can now rationalize better than she can. She's intelligent, but he's like another level. And so we must not school these young boys and girls, because what they need is just to be. Let me just address an issue that's raised by skeptics about schooling and socialization. There was, and it is mentioned in the book, a small-scale study took place in Canada that actually showed or suggested very strongly that children socialize better away from school, where they can mix with other children of like mind, older children and adults, and they build up a level of confidence and sociability that so far outstrips the schooled versions that it's actually embarrassing. Yeah. There was a school trip recently for a mixture of school children and home-educated children. And the home-educated children were at ease with themselves, asked questions of the grown-ups, and generally enjoyed themselves. And the school children clumped together like in cancerous clumps, frightened to ask anybody anything, looking desperately for a peer group that they could latch onto. And it's just so sad. And that's the kind of socializing. It's anti-socializing.
Ever since my wife and I decided to not send our children to school, people have said, "But how are they going to learn to socialize?" And this is such nonsense when you look at it, because every time we're out and about with our children, they talk to people at the shops, they talk to friends and relations. They have much more meaningful interaction than any child would in a typical day of school, much, much more. And they demonstrate, obviously we mix with other homeschooling families as well, so there's a community, but they demonstrate a far higher degree of functional literacy and confidence and generally being an efficacious young being than any of their school-going compatriots. And as you said, it's almost embarrassing, because I notice my children against their friends who do go to school, and the difference. I mean, I quietly feel pleased with the outcome. Because I just see them being so much more competent, so much more sure of themselves, as you say, and also they just seem to know more about life in general. I know that sounds fairly nondescript. My nearly 13-year-old son, his reading skills are fairly limited. But his knowledge of how to make fires, how to he knows birds and insect species. He knows lots about wildlife. His common sense and rational thinking is exceptional. He's a really functional young man. And when I compare this to school children who've experienced the school, they seem, as you've already alluded to, sort of they're shrunken, that they're almost damaged, if that's the right word.
Well, let me sum up what schooling is in a very stark, dramatic phrase. Schooling is a crime against humanity. It is mainly a systemic issue. It's not a personal issue against anyone in particular. But I have met head teachers and teachers who it would be appropriate to put in front of a tribunal and prosecute for crimes against humanity. And I really do not say that lightly.
I agree with you to the extent that it's all about this non-aggression principle, and the non-aggression principle really is the way forward for humanity. It's about non-coercion, to put it that slightly different way. And for me, as a homeschooler, I knew that the most important thing to do with my children was to not coerce them. I think it was Stefan Molyneux said that the single most powerful thing you can do for world peace, for any of us, if you're a parent, to contribute to world peace, is to parent non-aggressively, non-coercively, obviously not spanking your children. And that doesn't mean letting them run riot. It doesn't mean exerting no influence over them at all. But it means adhering to the non-aggression principle. And it can be challenging, but I think that really is the core of it. And you've already said that in this coercion thing. So, yeah, I think the most important thing and the solution, of course, I would advocate this anyway, wouldn't I, because I'm a homeschooler, but I think the most important thing is for parents to not send their children to school.
And it's to remind them, as the book does, that it's lawful, it's legal. I know Macron in France, Germany already has rendered schooling illegal. Homeschooling illegal.
Yeah.
But in my other capacity as a civil rights lawyer, I'm now going around the country reminding parents that certainly for now it's legal. And even if it's made illegal, it can never be made unlawful, because it's a free will choice, which only does your child good. As long as the child is happy at home, it's nobody's business. It's no one's business what that child is experiencing at home. As long as they're happy and healthy, that's the bottom line.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting that most people aren't aware of how straightforward it is to never send your children to school. It can be easier to not ever send them than to try to take them out of the schooling system once they're in. Experience has shown us with fellow home educators that have gone through that experience. But most people are not aware that the law, or the legislation, we should say more specifically, more accurately, says that you have a legal obligation to educate your children through schooling or otherwise. And I think that phrase, or otherwise, is the magic phrase, which is the door which allows you to escape school and educate, or see to your facilitate the self-education of your children in a home environment. And as you said, it's perfectly legal. It's a choice most parents can make, but so few are aware of it. Obviously, it's not well advertised, is it?
It's not well advertised, and neither is flexi schooling, which is the transitional option for a lot of parents. And that's what I would advocate for nervous newcomers. No need. If you're unsure, then just insist on flexi schooling. And again, the government does not advertise that, so there's no need to sign up for full-time schooling. You'll be able to find a flexi school near you. You may have to dig deep, but you'll find one. A simple letter of deregistration with a data subject access request thrown in if they object, which they can't do. But the data subject access request will go to the root of their objection. They can't object. It's a simple letter of deregistration. Yeah. That there's a template in the back of the book for that. Some people have had problems. and these are the more fundamentalist schools that just believe that there's no alternative.
Yeah.
They may object, but they cannot legally object.
Absolutely.
And so it's a simple process. And as just to encapsulate all of this, the last quote in the book is from an artist who says, schooling, modern schooling, is a social psychological experiment that has failed. It's time for a complete rethink.
So to move that on to the obvious solution, which is to not go to school, home education or home facilitated self-education, because again, it's important to go to the fundamentals and ask ourselves, what's education and what is it and what's it for? And it's essentially a process that we do for ourselves rather than having stuff forced into your mind or into your brain. It has to be a self-led process. But what I wanted to get onto is that most potential homeschoolers, most parents, most mothers and fathers, a lot of them, should I say, I'm not sure whether it's most, but I would assume it's most, are simply not in a position where they even have the choice at the moment, given our current structure of our society, with the need for perhaps two parents, if there are two parents in a home, and that's not a given, for two parents to be out working. School has become something of a sort of a childcare facility. So the options for some parents are necessarily limited, and you know, I don't know whether there's any words that you can say into that, David, but it might be frustrating for some parents to hear what we're discussing and be thinking, but I haven't got an alternative.
It's a very good question, and it is one of the most common questions that I'm asked. Now, I have to be very careful what I say because I'm not a parent, so I haven't faced this situation. But what I would suggest, what I would respectfully suggest, is that if there are two parents, that one of them at least consider downsizing their life and volunteering to go part-time or quit entirely and rely on the other parent, or maybe take turns, that one spends a year or two full-time and then goes part-time, and the other, and vice versa.
And these things are only temporary, aren't they? Just to interject, it's not a lifelong thing because children do grow up quite quickly.
Well, that's exactly right. It's amazing how quickly this will pass.
It's difficult, isn't it? I mean, the odds are stacked against single parents and indeed two working parents in a cash strapped situation where they both need to keep working. These are obviously challenges, and they really point to systemic problems with our society, which is again beyond the remit of this discussion. But there are big problems with the way we live. And you know, you could go into, you know, currencies being devalued and the need for us to work all hours and all this sort of stuff. We're basically sort of slaves to the system. So there are huge challenges for potential homeschoolers. But the point I'd like to make is that the prize is your child will not be damaged by a school experience. Now, for me, that was, and my circumstances, I managed to engineer them so that I could be at home with them during, you know, their formative years. And I appreciate not everyone's in that position. But for me, the number one prize, you know, right up there is to avoid damaging my children. And when my wife and I made the decision to homeschool, it was that I saw two issues. One, avoiding the damage of school, which your book so clearly lays out, and another issue was to try to provide a better preparation for life. Now, the first issue, which you've set out really rather succinctly, is a no-brainer, I think. The second one is up for debate. It's very difficult to know how best to educate. And I'd like to also make the point that homeschooling is on a sliding scale from school at home, you know, desks and timetables and all this sort of stuff, all the way through to complete laissez-faire, which is allowing children to decide what they do with their time.
That's called unschooling.
Unschooling, yeah. So there's a whole spectrum of possibility there. But that, it's a whole area of debate as to what is best. But I would advocate to any potential parent or mother or father considering removing their children from or their child from school that may be listening to this, that the most important aspect is to remove them from the harm. First, do no harm, I think, is a number one parental mantra, which should be the same as what is the official health system's mantra, although they don't adhere to it. But first, do no harm, and that involves removing children from the school. Then, pain over how best to achieve your child's education once you've taken them out of the danger, out of the firing line.
Well, yes, first of all, yes, minimize damage, and then optimize benefit. So yes, we can debate about how the optimization process can work, but as long as we're out of harm's way, everything's fine. Let me give you two more insights. One is a specific example. I was in London recently, and I met a young woman, who had her young girl in school for 3 months until she realized, no, that's enough of that. And the mother, I think that the girl was now 5, the mother adapted her own life to the child's needs. So she took on, I think it was cleaning work, because the girl could come with her. She cleans in, I think it was cleaning work, but it was manual work that the mother could do, and even the child could even help. And the girl was with her. We were in Hyde Park, and the girl was left to her own devices. She was making contact with the squirrels. She was digging. She was saying, she was conversing with adults. She was asking us questions. We were asking her questions. And she was amazing. The girl was amazing. At the age of 5, she was probably more amazing than most 12-year-olds who go to school, who are not very amazing, let me just say. I mean, in terms of their level of intelligence, curiosity, confidence, imagination. It was just amazing. And so the mother was adapting her life for her daughter's needs. So this is what is going to be required. We're going to need mothers and fathers to put their sons and daughters temporarily, as you suggested, because it's not a permanent thing, as their priority.
There is a growing homeschooling community out there, which needs to be mentioned, and there are even creative solutions where households, parents could team up and look after each other's children for some days of the week. So, being creative with solutions, we can be, and there are ways around this. Obviously, that doesn't take away from the problems, though. It is a difficult issue for people who might be thinking about homeschooling. So, David, I'm mindful of time. Do you want to wrap things up, draw strings together, or conclude with any particular points? First of all, I'd like to say here's the book. It's an excellent book. School No Place for Children. There'll be a link to get a copy below this video, and indeed on the blog page for this podcast. But David, do you want to wrap up in any way, shape or form, and indeed let people know how you can be reached in case they wanted to take things further?
Yeah, well, in terms of wrapping things up, just to raise an issue which is featured in the book, which is, again, it's a complex issue that affects us all. Anyone who's gone to school will have some form of trauma or limitation that they're dealing with, and that they will have ascribed it, put it down to something else. Because we all go to school and we so take it for granted, that all the issues that we have in life, like lack of personal confidence, lack of public speaking skills, lack of interrelational skills, lack of creativity, lack of imagination, what we've been trained to do is put them down to our own inadequacies. We're not inadequate in any way. We are limitless beings of infinite potential. Now, that's a cliche, but if you can begin to feel the truth of that, then you're on the way to healing what has been done to us. So, in a nutshell, schooling is a traumatizing process, a controlling process, a limitation process. designed to create a workforce that will do as they are told. It's a commercial, industrial, and post-industrial model. It's a post-military model in which amazing young beings are shaped and modeled, cookie cut, as it were, into a form that will fit into an industrial or a workplace environment later on in life. They also unlearn the gift of curiosity, the hunger for learning. They also unlearn their natural sociability. No one is more naturally sociable than a young boy or girl. They also take on the idea that life is something to be tolerated, not celebrated. In a nutshell, if we keep children away from school, they will learn to cherish themselves, cherish life, cherish others, and we would build a society, build a world that reflects all of that.
So, Dave, can you perhaps let people know if you have a website or any means of contact, how people can get in touch with you if they want to learn more?
Yes, they can go on Facebook. The book has a Facebook page, School No Place for Children. People can email me on my full name, David Adelman, lowercase, that's Adelman, 1959 @gmail.com. If they have any reservations about home education, and I'll help them, or the idea of just pulling a boy or girl from school and the legal ramifications. So that combines my two expertises, education and law, nicely. So that's where I'm heading. My personal crusade is in the next 2 or 3 years to help 500,000 boys and girls out of the schooling system. That's my personal crusade.
Wonderful. Well, that sounds fantastic. Well, thank you so much for giving us your time today, David. Really appreciate that and sharing your perspective. Hopefully some parents and maybe thinking individuals will pick this message up and run with it and maybe feel inspired to take their children out of school. Thank you all for listening and indeed watching on YouTube. And indeed, I'd urge you to perhaps visit the website, lawfulrebel.com. There's loads more there on how to find truth. There's stuff on home education, how to live differently, how to find health and all these good stuff. So please check that out and do join me again for another episode of Living Outside the Matrix.
Be the change you want to see. Be the change you want to see. Be the change you want to see. Be the change you want to see.